Good evening, Rabbi. Sorry, I was taking the trash out.
Oh, that's an important project there.
Yes, it is. How are you doing?
Thank God. Okay. Everything is good. Masak Wen Gimel. So now we spoke about the wicks. Now we're talking about the oil. So it says like this: "En madlikin ner shel Shabbat ela b'shemen hamishach akapitila." So here also, right, we need some kind of an oil which is able to be absorbed into the wick, so it can burn well. Burn in an even manner. Gotta use a good one. So therefore, he says, don't use wax, right? And don't use tar. Right? Don't use shemen kik, which is a type of oil. So Rashi explains what it is, right? So he says we're talking about cottonseed oil. Right? And don't use also fat, the animal fat. These are two different types of fat, right? One is in the tail, and one is in the rear hind quarter. Below beitan, and also don't use itan, right? What is itan? It's a type of like liquid fuel, maybe like kerosene, something like that. We'll see what it is. Even though, right, this one actually goes well with the wick. But here's the problem, right? The problem is that it has a bad smell. So you don't want to have a bad smell on your Shabbat table, with this oil, with the kerosene, whatever. So he says, why are we concerned, that it has a bad smell? Because he may just because of the smell, he may just get up and leave, the room because he can't handle it. So this is what we're afraid of. Then he goes on, v'lo betzori, right? Don't use sorry. So what is sorry, right? If you remember, if you noticed, this is one of the ingredients of the incense, right? Which is in the temple, burned in the temple. Hatsori v'atziporen. So what is this? What is this sorry? It's like a resin, that comes off a certain tree. Some say it's like balsam, or something like that. There's different opinions about what this is actually. But anyway, right, it's like a resin from a tree. That's pretty much what it is, And from this resin also is made in the old days, they used to make chewing gum from that. Today they use other types of ingredients. More like artificial stuff, But anyway, that's pretty much what it is. It's a resin. Apparently, right, it has a very good smell because that's why they use it for the incense. Okay. So it says, so then what's the problem with this one, right? If it has a good smell, as we said, then what's going to be the issue with that? So explains the Torah over here. The problem is, that the smell, like dissipates into the air, and we're afraid, since it smells so good, he's going to start using it for some purpose, removing it from the candle and using it. And that we don't want. Why? Because he's doing extinguishing like that if he takes it from there. So this is the reason why we don't use it. Okay, fantastic. So then he says like this, the Torah. Right? It says even if you put a little olive oil in those substances that we just mentioned, so there, so now it makes them, absorb better. Nevertheless, he says, we don't use that, the light. Why? Because we're afraid he won't put shemen zayit, he won't put olive oil in there. So he may come to use it by itself, and not as a combination. This is the reason why we don't do it. Okay. So this is similar to the concept of the wicks that we saw there last a couple of days ago, whatever it was. Same thing here. Okay, so I guess we're done with the tour. Let's go to the Bet Yosef. So says Bet Yosef, Beresh Perek Lamed King, right? It's in that chapter, as we said, right? This is the Mishnah that we read on Erev Shabbat. Kaf Aleph Amud Bet, Kaf Amud Bet. Lo bezefet velo b'shava. It says there, right? Don't use tar and don't use wax. So how come we use wax today? If that's the case, right? So the answer is that in those days, the wax wasn't like a liquid form, so it had a different texture to it. So that stuff was no good, the liquid. But the one we use today, the solid wax, is actually pretty good. So we have no problem with that. Okay. And he goes on, below shemen kik, right? Don't use shemen kik, right? So what kind of oil is that? We said it was cottonseed oil. Don't use that. That reminds me, by the way, one time the rabbi, Maran Shalom, he gave us a class on this topic, and he invited us to come, and all of a sudden, I hear that he's talking about cottonseed oil. I was like, oh, how did he get into this all of a sudden? Like, what got him into this all of a sudden? So what he was trying to say, a kiddush, that even though, right, it says in the Mishnah we shouldn't use cottonseed oil, but he says the one that we have today is actually, burns well. So he said we can use it, that's not really a problem. So he was trying to say, right, that's not the same as it was in those days. So what's the reason why cottonseed oil today burns well? Probably because it's very well filtered. So it's pure like liquid, oil without any impurities in there. Without any kind of dregs or whatever, all kinds of stuff there. Because what happens is, right, that you don't filter this oil, it has like residue from the seeds, inside it. So that makes it burn, poorly. But now, right, that you filter it, and it comes out really nice and clean. So then you're okay. So the rabbi said his conclusion was, I remember, until like I remember it was like yesterday, even though it was like 15 years ago. Right, his conclusion was, right, that you're allowed to use it, no problem. Today's cottonseed oil. Okay, God bless his soul. What can I tell you? Let's move on. So then he says, right, and don't use also the fat tail and the hind fat, right? All these fats, animal fats, right? I guess we call that lard today, right? The lard or whatever, God knows, whatever it's called. Anyway, we don't use that. The Gemara, Shemanim Shamu Chachamim En Madlikin Bahem, says in Gemara that those oils, right, that the rabbi said we shouldn't light with them, because they don't, as we said, right, they don't get absorbed into the wick very well. Gemara, my shemen kik. So Gemara asks over there, right? What is shemen kik? What is that? What kind of oil is that? Amar Shemuel of Echad Yesh Kik Shemo. So according to Shmuel, right, some kind of a bird, and the oil comes from that bird. Rabbi Yitzchak Amar Mashcha de. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, right, it's oil from kaza, right, which could be cottonseed. We'll see what that is. Resh Lakish Amar Kikayon Diona. So he says, right, it's some kind of a oil which comes from pigeon, whatever. There's Rashi, Mashcha de kaza. So Rashi explains, right? He says, kaza, what is that? As we said, right, cottonseed oil. That's how he explains it. Okay, good. Tanan, it also says in the Mishnah, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, this rabbi says, "En madlikin beitran." Don't use itran, right? So we said, right, it's against kerosene, whatever, something that smells bad. If you want to go smell it, go to the airport, right? Because that's what they use for the airplanes. So it's not, it's not exactly the best smell, if you know what I mean. if you go out to the tarmac, you will get a whiff of it. Okay. Not a very good smell. Fine. So then we have Tanan tu b'matnitin. It says also in the Mishnah, Chavdal Amud Bet. Rabbi Yishmael Omer en madlikin be'itran mipnei kibod Shabbat. So he says, right, we don't use kerosene because it's not honor for Shabbat, right, to have that bad smell. Not respectful. The rabbis, he says the Cholashmanim, they allow all types of oils. Beitan or neft, right? Whether it's kerosene or neft, right? So neft is like food oil. Also doesn't smell very good. Not the best smell in the world. Something like that. It's like food oil kind of thing. Okay, so then what else we have here? Rabbi Tarfon Omer, en madlikin ela b'shemen zayit bilvad. So Rabbi Tarfon says, you know what? You should only use olive oil, right? That's it, nothing else. That's his opinion. Right, and we already have mentioned, right, a couple of times that olive oil is the best, out of all of them because it burns very bright, and also, the smell is very tolerable, right? Nothing really bad there. So you're all good, Okay, so then Gemara, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, en madlikin beitran, my tama. So ask over there in Gemara, why don't we use kerosene? Rabba, Amar Rabba mitoch sherechora, bad smell, right? As we said, right, he may just leave the room, and go out. So that's not very good. Why? Because he's in the middle of his meal. You know what I mean? It's not exactly the best thing in the world. Have to leave the room. It's like ruining your Shabbat, basically. Amar le Abaye v'yatzeh. So Abaye says, right, okay, if he wants to go out, let him go out. In other words, it's not the end of the world, That's what he says. Amar le Shani Omer Hadakat haner b'Shabbat chova. So it says, you know why he says that he cannot go out? He didn't go out because lighting candles on Shabbat is an obligation. Tavu Arif Be'arosh Be'Rambam, they all wrote this, right? These rabbis, this opinion. Tamayu the midah hamahadre amora'er lifrosh tama the Rabbi Yishmael. So he says the reason is because since right, the Amoraim went out of their way to explain the reason for Rabbi Yishmael's opinion. Alma kivate naktinan. So you see from there halachas like that, right? In other words, there's a general rule like this in the Talmud, which is if the rabbis are going out of their way to explain that opinion, that means they consider it to be, on the spot, right? So therefore, it is a halakha. Sometimes that's how we paskin because of this reason. Okay. So it says when it comes to the other oils, we do like the rabbis, the Rabbi Yishmael, right? Who argued Rabbi Yishmael. Nami, I'm sorry, the Rabbi Yishmael Nami lo palig, because Rabbi Yishmael only argues on them, ela beitan, only regarding kerosene, levado by itself. Behavale Rabbi Tarfon vechida legabayu. So Rabbi Tarfon is a minority opinion there, So that's the reason why we don't go like that. Rabbeinu Yerucham b'chelek bet. What about this rabbi? Pasak legamer chachamim. He passed like all together like the chachamim, the rabbis. Besharu af beitan, and that they allow, right, even to use kerosene. Oh, there you go. Uh-huh. But now the Africa, Al-Gav, the Askinan Halifata says you should know. He says that even though we pass in halacha, with the rabbis, to use all the oils. Katvot Tosfot says Tosfot Sham there. Amar Abaye regarding that which Abaye said. So he says in the beginning, right? In the older days, you used to go for sesame oil. That was your favorite, right? Oil for this purpose. And the Shabbat Pshita the Shemen Zayt, Mufar. But he says, right, that but come on. It's obvious that olive oil is the best, for this purpose. And also for Hanukkah, right? That's what we say there as well. Same thing here. Olive oil is the best. So one reason is because right.
Why do we say olive oil is the best?
As we said, right here, he brings this reason because it gets absorbed very well into the wick.
Okay, because absorption, not because it's fragrance free or whatever.
Right. So as we said, right, it doesn't have a bad smell. Even though it does have somewhat of a smell. You know what I'm talking about, right? There is somewhat of a smell there, but it's tolerable. So nothing bad there really. That's the other thing, But then, as we said, right, it also burns the brightest. It has the brightest flame out of all of them. Okay. And then we have, according to Kabbalah, right, they say, that it's very conducive to have children who are Talmidei Chachamim, if the mother uses olive oil.
But what is special about olive oil, I guess is my question.
Oh, what is special, right? Well, learn from the temple, right? Because they only use olive oil there. They don't use nothing else. Right? So they don't use any other oil there. Why is that? Because it's the highest quality oil that there is.
Okay, so today we have paraffin oil, right, which also burns very cleanly. Is that
right? But the truth is, it's not as good as olive oil, though.
Okay.
Even though paraffin is very good, but olive oil is even better.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So that's the thing. By the way, if you go to Israel, look how the ladies are there. In Israel, the Israeli ladies, all they use is olive oil for everything. For salads. For making dishes, frying, everything is olive oil there. Because they know how good it is, for all these things. It's just like the best oil that there is. Also, the doctors say that it's also healthy as well. So olive oil has incredible properties. The Talmud says also, by the way, it's also very good for the skin. To rub it into the skin. It smoothens, the skin, moistens the skin. So, it's like it's a wonder oil. Right? Nothing compares to it. Today, by the way, the doctors are beginning to realize, the value of olive oil. They're very much, recommending it, and for many uses, all kinds of uses. So, it's become, a big fad also, in our times as well. But in the times of the Talmud, olive oil was the thing, And also here, right, as I told you, in Israel, it's a big thing. Also by Italians, they love it. There's also other cultures, Moroccans. It's a big thing by them, Okay. Say no more. When my daughter was here, from Israel, all she used was olive oil for everything, And as you know, right, it's quite expensive, olive oil, So I was spending a pretty penny with her, what I mean? She was like finishing a bottle, every month or so. I don't know, God knows, whatever it was. Now here's the funny thing, right? Me, after she left, I mean? My daughter, that was like a year and a half ago, I still have the same bottle, haven't finished it yet when she left. So I don't use it as much as she did. That's for sure. Okay. They also, in Israel, what they do is they put olive oil into the hummus, also to mix it in with the hummus. It gives it like a nice flavor, texture, whatever. All kinds of stuff like that. Okay, I've said enough. Enough said. So let's move on. So as we said, right, that it gets absorbed well, absorbs well. So it says it's better than all of them, right? In terms of the absorption, it's the best one. So that's the thing, right? It could be that's the reason why it burns so bright, because it gets so saturated into the wick, that there's a lot of fuel there going on. Could be that's the reason why. Okay. Right. So it says, right. So everybody agrees, that olive oil is the best, in terms of this halacha. Hands down. Same thing for Hanukkah, right? And when it comes to the right in the temple, not only they used only olive oil, but they also used the first press, which is the highest quality one. That's the one they only use that. That's it. And so when you go right to the store, right, and especially in Israel, it says there, right, Shemen Zayt Katit. You know what I mean? First press. They sell the first press. Which is the best olive oil. And one of the reasons is because also it's not so acidic. The other presses are more acidic. So they give like a bad taste of the food a little bit. Sourness, sour taste of the food. But the first press is like totally non-acidic. Like as much as it can be. So it has a much more pure taste. More clear, more pure clarity. That's so in the temple they only used that. That's it. That's all they did. For the meal offerings, right? The mincha, all those things. Okay. And also for the menorah that they lit there as well. Everything was olive oil. First press. Okay, so anyway, right, that's that. Let's move on. And then we're talking about, right, tsori, right? Which we sweat is like some kind of a resin, that comes off the tree, right? Some people say it's balsam, as I said, right? Not really sure. I always, I don't know why this is. Like, because when we go to shul, especially the Sfardim, we read this every day, the incense. So we read like 3 times a day. So it's like when I read it, I always think to myself, I said, you know what? Maybe I should like research, like which resin is this? Maybe I can find like a definitive, answer to that because there are different opinions, as I said, And then I always forget to look for it. I don't know what it is, I never remember to look for it, to research it. Okay, maybe this time I'll remember. I don't know. Maybe we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens if I get lucky. So anyway, right, tori, as we said, right, it's this resin, nice smelling resin, and balsam is very nice. Could be it's balsam. But in many countries, you know what they call this? They call it mastic. It's like a resin from that tree. They call it mastic. And by the way, the thing is, that in many languages, mastic, you know what it means? It means gum because, as I said, right, they make also chewing gum from that. In the old days, they used to do that because it has a nice texture to it, like rubbery, and also it's when it dries, it gets like rubbery, like gum, and also has a nice smell, a nice taste to it. That's why they used it as chewing gum in the old days, before they got the artificial stuff. Okay, whatever. So that's that. Mastic. That's story. Gam ze sham, right? But right, en madlikim but sorry, right? So it says don't use sorry, So here's the thing, right? Here, just the opposite, right? The smell is like really, really good. So it dissipates, all over. It like, it wafts around all over the place. And we're afraid, right, he's going to use it, when he sees how good it smells. So that may cause, right, him to extinguish the fire by using, the fuel, right, for the candle. Okay, that's that. So what does he say about this? He says, אמר לאביי, בדילמה מור מפני שהוא עף. Oh, so he says, right? Maybe we shouldn't also use more, right? Which is like myrrh, I think, something more myrrh, right? And he says, why shouldn't we use that? Because it flies around, like I guess it's like, it makes like sparks. Chada the old kamar. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I didn't say it right. I'm sorry. Let me read that again one more time. Right? What he's asking like this, Abaye, right? Abaye is asking him, you gave the reason why we don't use right the tzori, right? Because it's the smell is too good. You may come to use it. But he says, why didn't you say the fact that it also like flies around? It's like it gives off, emanates sparks, like flies around. Why didn't you say that? So he answers in Gemara, he gave you another reason, right? In other words, yeah, that and this too, both of them are true. They're both a problem, One is because it flies around. The old Shema is to pick him, and also we're afraid, as we said, he's going to use it as well. Since it smells so good. Very tempting, Oh. Look what he says, interesting, right? So he says, why are we afraid that it flies around? So he says, what happens is that it flies around, like these little sparks, like fly around, and it sticks to the walls of the house, he says. Oh. So you know what it does? It makes a fire. Can you imagine? It burns the walls. Oh my God. You're going to get like a fire going on there. That's the thing. So this sori, is dangerous stuff. It's flammable. That's what it is. Very, extremely flammable. So therefore, we don't want to use it, right? Dangerous. You don't want to be calling the fire department on Shabbat. You know what I mean? I just got like a fire in my walls, because I used right balsam, whatever. Right? They're gonna say, "What did you do? What was that again?" Okay, it's gonna be a little bit of a downer there, using this stuff. Okay, so that's that. So comments on this Bet Yosef. V'Rabbeinu lo katav ta'am the mipnei shehu af. So he says the Tur didn't bother to write this reason, because it flies around like this, flammable. The fish, inyan Shabbat. So he says why? Because it's not really connected to Shabbat. The mishum hachi lo izkiru Rabban gam ken, Rabba gam ken. So because of this, Rabba then also didn't mention it. Ipnei kach lo katav gam ken hadatanya hatam. So it's because of this he didn't write what we learned there. Right? In madlikin ben neft. Right? He didn't mention the crude oil, things like this, right? Lavan, right? Which is like a white color, whatever. So it's not crude oil, some kind of like a derivative, from crude oil, whatever it's called, the white stuff. It says you shouldn't even use this stuff even in weekdays, for candles. Then all the more so on Shabbat you shouldn't use it. Because these things also fly around, they're very flammable, highly flammable, So a little bit dangerous there to use these fuels. Even though the Rambam, even though these rabbis did write it, but the Tur didn't bother to write it because it's like, kind of like obvious, or redundant. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Okay. That's it. Okay, so let's go to Shulchan Aruch. So says Shulchan Aruch, אין מדליקים נר לשבת אלא משמן הנמשך אחר הפתילה. As we said, right, you should only use an oil for Shabbat which absorbs into the wick, gets saturated. ולפיכך אין מדליקים בזפת. So therefore he says don't use tar. ולא בשבר, and don't use wax, as we said, right? We're talking about, their wax, not our wax, which was more like a liquid jelly form, kind of thing. ולא בשמן העשוי בצמר גפן. Also, don't use cottonseed oil, as we said, right? The rabbi said now we can use it, right, in this generation because it's very pure, very clean, very, very filtered, highly filtered. ולא בעלייה. Also, don't use, right, as we said, right, those fats, the fat tail or, right, the hind fat. וכן אין מדליקים ביתן. Also, don't use kerosene, as we said, right? Leave that for the airplanes, don't use it. Okay. So he says, what's the reason? Why? He has bad smell, right? He's going to leave the room, right? He's going to get out of there. It's a good thing we don't smell that stuff inside the plane, that will be a killer. What can I tell you? So anyway, right? And also don't use right, as we said, that resin, right? The balsam, whatever it is. I have to look into that, see what this is. I don't know if we have a definitive answer what it is, by the way. It could be that we're not really sure, but because there are certain spices for the incense, that we're not really sure what they are. We don't have a clear tradition. So because of that, we would have a hard time making incense today, for the temple. We would need like a prophet, to tell us what it is. Some of these ingredients, because we're not really sure what they are. Some of them we do know. Like 50-50, something like that, whatever. So anyway, this tzori, right? The problem with that is, as we said, right, the smell, is very good, dissipates, so you're going to want to use it. So you're going to be extinguishing the fire like that, by removing the that stuff, that resin. By the way, even if you don't remove, you should know. You may know already. You may well know, but if you don't know, I'll tell you now, right? That even if you don't take the whole amount of resin which is in that candle, even if you just remove like a quarter of it, let's say, whatever, right? For argument's sake, you still are extinguishing because it makes the flame weaker, when you remove some of it. So this is the reason why we don't want that. It doesn't extinguish totally, but even partial extinguishing is called extinguishing. Even partial, just like the same thing with the right when it comes to igniting. When you ignite partially, that's also called igniting. When you add more, you're also liable for that. Okay, so ונמצא מתחייב משום מכבה. Okay, what else we got here? Okay, that's it for this one. Very good. So they do mention, the poskim regarding, our wax, that since it burns, well, so we can use it, even though it's written in the halacha not to use it. But nowadays, the hard wax that we have burns, fairly well. So not really a problem. Okay, fantastic. What else we got here? I guess we got the whole thing here. Oh, maybe I missed something. 1 second. Yeah, I did miss something. I'm sorry. I don't know how sometimes the screen, jumps on me, so I miss it. Okay, so let's finish it off. So as we said, right, don't use tar, don't use wax, that old wax, right? And also, right, any, cottonseed oil, the old one. And also, right, as we said, right, don't use the fat tail, and the hind fat. Also, don't use itan, right, which is kerosene, because of the bad smell. It's going to go out. I think I read this already. Maybe I was right. But sorry, right, and don't use, right. Okay, we're done. Yeah, we got it. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, I'm sorry, we did do it, but it doesn't hurt to review. There's no law against it to review. Okay, so I guess we'll stop here. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chazak u'baruch, leila tov. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Quick before you go off. So my candles are I guess they're kind of like gelatinized, but they're olive oil, but they're solid. And then that's okay?
Yes, I've seen that before. Yeah.
Okay. And then
so that stuff is probably pretty good.
It's nice. It like turns to liquid when you burn it.
Right. It's good stuff.
It's pretty good. So the other question I guess I have is, if in a pinch, I know we're not supposed to have like scented candles or whatever, but if that's all you had, would that be acceptable?
Yeah. I don't know what's wrong with scented candles. Something wrong with it?
Well, aren't we not supposed to have like fragrances on Shabbat?
We're not supposed to burn incense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the same thing, because the incense they were burning on Yom Tov, that's what we're talking about.
Okay.
I mean, but here we're lighting it before.
I see.
So it shouldn't be a problem, So I don't know if there is any rule against the scented candles. I've never heard of it. Okay. So I don't think it exists. I think it's a myth.
Okay.
Okay, God bless. All the best. Laila tov.
Laila tov. Thank you, Rabbi.